Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Bonds and Stories, we retell those moments honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. My name is Mara Chen, 28, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the person who wiped fingerprints off the glass while everyone else posed for the photo. In our family album, my sister Elena is centered, chin lifted, a practiced glow in her eyes. Mine is the hand steadying the frame, the corner of a shoulder, the reflection you only notice if you zoom in. At our last Thanksgiving, the one with the lopsided pumpkin pie and the centerpiece made from supermarket chrysanthemums, Elena tipped a goblet of Pinot across the tablecloth. The stain spread like a dark petal. She didn't look down. "Mara, napkins," she said, already returning to her story about a clerkship interview. My mother, Rosa, flashed the smile she saved for company and nudged her heel off beneath the table. "Be a dear," she added, that gentle tone that never quite asked, only arranged. I lifted the heel by 2 fingers and without raising my voice slid open the trash cabinet and let it fall. The clatter was small. The silence after it was not. I put my coat on the chair back and walked out into the brittle Wisconsin cold. Our duplex sits on a street where maples lean hard in winter, and every lawn has the same rectangular patch of snow crushed by mail carriers' boots. Inside the hallway is a museum of Elena's ascent debate trophies, polished so often the metal looks thinner. A photograph of her in a blazer, shaking hands with someone whose name my parents say, as if it were a spell, and centerpiece of the shrine, the blue-crested envelope from Yale in a neat black frame. A legacy, my mother calls it, as if glass could confer permanence. My father, Mark, works long shifts at the power plant and prefers the quiet of radio baseball. When conversations crest, he lets them roll past. In our house, weather moved through rooms and he waited it out. I was 8 when I brought home a ribbon. County math fair, nothing fancy, just a blue rosette that meant I'd understood patterns faster than the other kids. I remember the stiffness of the certificate and the little pops of static from my wool sweater. Rosa set the ribbon on the counter, then slid Elena's science worksheet toward me. "Help her with this first," she said, already tying up the garbage bag with the other hand. That became the rhythm my small wins folded into Elena's schedule. I toasted bagels, packed lunches, ironed blouses I was told not to borrow. "You're younger," my mother would say. Families work because the little ones pitch in. Elena got tutors and a Saturday piano teacher with pearl earrings. I got hand-me-down sweaters with sleeves that landed shy of my wrists, and a part-time job at a diner that smelled permanently of syrup. The tips went into a mint tin under my bed, with faint faces of presidents worn smudgy from being counted and recounted. When Elena turned 16, a red coupe appeared in the driveway ribbon, and all the kind of car that made neighbors open their blinds. On the same afternoon, a cold front sank over the city, and I pulled on boots with cracked vinyl and walked the 2 miles to the library. Dinner that night was a seminar about Elena's future moot court model UN and alumni brunch where the coffee was nuanced. When I said my chemistry grade had moved from a B to an A, the conversation pinballed back to application deadlines. Teachers at school called me Elena's sister, like it was my legal name, a title I hadn't earned and couldn't shed. Elena's friends learned quickly that I was reliable. I returned borrowed jackets pressed and delivered flashcards at the door. There was a sweetness to being useful, but it didn't taste like being seen. I began eating lunch in the stacks at the long table near the radiator, where the paint cracked like puzzle pieces. I read about compounding the way some people read romance, heart-quickening, breath held. Numbers didn't interrupt. Numbers didn't ask me to fetch anyone's coat. At 15, my team built a time series model that forecast commodity fluctuations for a state math modeling meet. We won. The certificate is still somewhere in a shoebox with a postcard of the Milwaukee Art Museum tucked inside. No one from home was there. Rosa had driven to Madison for Elena's debate regionals and texted me a smiley about it. Weeks later, I recognized lines from my write-up in Elena's speech about market foresight, and I clapped from the 4th row while a piece of me folded very quietly in half. Nothing I did felt like rebellion. It felt like insurance. I stalked the mint tin and learned to be small when smallness kept the room from breaking. I studied after lights out with the bathroom door, cracked notebook balanced on my knees. The day the acceptance letter from Lakeview State University arrived, I didn't tape it to the hallway. I slid it under my mattress with the tin. Leaving did not feel like escape so much as a carefully timed exit through a door I'd been oiling for years. My first apartment was a studio above a nail salon with a lock that clicked cleanly. There was a radiator that hissed, and when I cracked the window in winter, the room smelled faintly of acetone and snow. I learned the price of canned tomatoes at 3 different grocery stores and the exact heat setting on the hot plate that would keep ramen from bloating. In lecture, finance unfolded like a map. Risk was not a dare, but a series of dials. Probability was a language I could conjugate on hard days. Dr. Nadia Patel, the assistant professor who split her time between teaching and advising the Student Investment Club, stopped by my table one afternoon and looked over the plots I'd drawn by hand. "You see structure where other people see noise," she said. "Keep going." She taught in verbs, rebalance ladder hedge, wait. I opened a paper trading account and watched my imaginary portfolio with the fervor other students reserved for game days. In a class on market anomalies, Jonah Reyes noticed the way my pencil hovered before a trend line. "You're playing 3 moves out," he said, not admiring exactly, just observing. He had the kind of face that made strangers tell him secrets. With him, I didn't sound like the echo of someone else's story. But when I took him home over fall break and we sat at my mother's table, Rosa narrated Elena's latest The Internship, the faculty recommendation letter written in looping fountain pen ink. Uncles nodded in synchronized time. Aunts cooed. When I tried to explain the options ladder I was building for a class project, the room changed the channel without looking at the remote. Jonah touched my knee under the table. "You're allowed to say no," he whispered. I smiled the way people smile when they're trying not to make more work. The summer before senior year, I landed an internship at a hedge fund housed on the 22nd floor of a building with carpet soft enough to erase footsteps. My job was not glamorous, read, annotate flag. But something I wrote about downside protection in a small cap basket made its way into a meeting deck, and a client shifted allocations in time to dodge a dip that later looked from the charts like an obvious hazard. I texted Rosa, buoyed by the strange intimacy of being useful where people actually noticed. Her reply came an hour later. "Law is still a higher calling, sweetie. Maybe a JD MBA Elena's mentor says it opens doors." Jonah rolled his eyes, but softly. "You are not their staff," he told me in the bus shelter wind needling through our coats. "You are their daughter." Graduation crept forward, even as the world felt like it was being set on a low simmer. Jonah had an offer in New York. Mine was tender, then tentative, then sitting for signatures. He said not harshly, "Pick a life where you are central, not furniture," and the words slid under my ribs and lodged. I wanted to say yes to that life. I also wanted to stop the weather that moved through the rooms back home. When Rosa called and said Elena had a Yale alumni dinner the same weekend as my ceremony, I heard the familiar smile in her voice. "We'll try to make both," she said, a sentence that is almost always a promise to attend one. On the morning I stepped into my rented gown, I watched the door until I couldn't keep checking every sound. I shook the dean's hand, then my department chair's and Jonah's, and pretended my palms were not empty. After commencement, the markets buckled. Risk models started coughing up numbers no one trusted. The tentative in my offer letter corroded like a battery left in a toy too long. Jonah left for the city with a backpack and a plan he swore would survive a cross-country bus. I packed my cum laude certificate and my notebooks in a liquor store box, taped it shut, and took the evening train north. At the duplex, the hallway museum was unchanged, except for a new photo of Elena in a cobalt dress standing beside a judge whose name had more consonants than vowels. "Be useful," Rosa said, breezing past me with a basket of laundry. I stacked my box under the coat rack and slid my hands into the pockets of my thrifted pea coat. I was useful. That had never been the problem. The week after graduation, I slept in my childhood room with the floral wallpaper Rosa never let me peel away. The mattress curled at the edges from years of turning. Through the vent, I could hear the radio in the kitchen, farm reports at dawn, oldies at lunch. Breathless talk shows in the afternoon that made everything sound like a cliff. Mark left for the plant before sunrise boots scuffing the back steps. Rosa moved through the house in a constant choreography of small tasks that did not require me to speak in order to be enlisted. "Mara Carey," she'd say, and a stack of folded towels appeared in my arms as if by physics. I stacked my liquor store box of notebooks in the closet, slid the door shut and put my hands in my coat pockets so I wouldn't be available. Interviews blurred temp agencies with carpet, the color of tea, a downtown bank that asked me to smile more, a startup where no one made eye contact long enough to read a resume. The market had turned cautious and then skeptical. A dozen polite emails said the same thing with different stationery. 5 months later, on a Tuesday, with sleet that slapped instead of snowed, Riverside Advisory called and offered a junior analyst seat at a desk with a view of a brick wall. I said yes so quickly, I had to repeat it in a calmer tone. My ID photo that afternoon was grainy and unslept. The badge felt heavier than the plastic deserved. Riverside was not glossy. We were good at triage and discipline. Our principal, Lucas Voss, believed in clean books and boring miracles. If you can reduce a line item without anyone noticing except the line itself, he told me during my first week, you've done more than most heroes. He started sliding me the messy files. Clients who wouldn't stop buying gadgets for the office, a contractor who treated cash flow like a rumor, a retired teacher whose son added subscriptions the way other people added hobbies. I learned to read a ledger for mood anxiety hid in rounding differences. Denial liked to cluster in automatic payments no one had logged into since 2014. At night, the office thinned to a hum, and I stayed. Some evenings, Lucas would pause at my desk, drop a folder without looking like he was dropping it, and say, "If you have thoughts." I underlined. I penciled arrows. I wrote "Y" in the margins until the paper looked like it had grown veins. When a client followed my notes and saved themselves from a bad refinance, I didn't text home. I bought a pack of good pens and a bag of rice and a plant that tolerated neglect. Money flowed the way water does when you stop pretending it isn't leaking. Once the month's check cleared, I opened a second account at Prairie Community Credit Union with a debit card I never activated and a balance I didn't mention. On weekends, I met with friends of friends at a cafe near the bus depot and built them budgets that respected their pride. I didn't put my name on anything. I emailed spreadsheets and explained the difference between a plan and a secret. When people insisted on paying, I took folding money and slid it into the mint tin with the president's wild-eyed from being counted. Home didn't change, which meant I changed more quietly. I washed dishes because plates needed washing, not because anyone thanked me. Elena's portrait wall picked up a new frame, a photo from a summer clerkship reception, her hand on a judge's sleeve-like balance. At family gatherings, I wore the same charcoal sweater and let it read as confession. Rosa's sisters marveled at Elena's stamina and asked me if I had considered graduate school. "Legal training is wonderful for the mind," Aunt Vivian said, tapping her temple, as if she were winding a clock there. I nodded and handed her a napkin. The year turned. I replaced the soles in my boots and learned the bus schedule from memory. "You have the patience of a winter road crew," Lucas said one afternoon, when I recalculated a debt snowball for the third time after a client confessed to a holiday relapse at a furniture outlet. He started CCing me on the emails that mattered. At quarter's end, he slid a folder across my desk labeled "After Hours." Inside were numbers for 3 clients who wanted help mining waste from their habits. "Only if you want," he said. I wanted. I didn't change the fee schedule, I changed the route. Their checks came to me by mail, folded inside cards with kittens or sunflowers, as if we were sharing something soft that made a hard thing palatable. Some nights, I returned to the duplex after Rosa had gone to bed, and Mark had set out his thermos for morning. The hallway shrine shone dully, even in the dark, the glass catching light from the street. I could have dusted it with my eyes closed. Elena texted photos of rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows that belonged to other people. She wrote captions about eagerness and grit, about the way law was an instrument that found truth when properly tuned. In the comments, relatives clapped in words. I liked the posts and went to sleep. 3 years passed, the way muscle grows incremental, not dramatic, until something heavy shifts and you realize it used to crush you. Riverside gave me a title bump and a wider spreadsheet. I no longer sat at the desk with a brick view. Out my new window, I could see the parking lot, and on clear days, the narrow river slicing town in two. The after-hours work multiplied without advertising. People told each other I would not make them feel ashamed, and shame, it turned out, was the most expensive thing many of them bought each month. Numbers behaved for me. I learned which stories they liked to tell when you prevented them from lying. On my 26th birthday, I checked the union account balance, traced the zeros with the end of a pencil, and exhaled. $500,000 wasn't a magic number, it was a pair of good shoes. I mailed Rosa and Mark a postcard with a lighthouse on it and wrote about the weather. I did not include the word portfolio. Elena messaged a video of a toast, someone saying her name into a microphone as if they were promising the room a show. When I flew home for holidays, I packed a carry-on that might have been mistaken for someone else's: one black dress, one sweater, a book with a library stamp. Family learned they could not pry open what I didn't bring. The winter Elena announced she might be shortlisted for a fellowship. The furnace at the duplex groaned, and the kitchen tap shivered. We ate soup in our coats. Mark held a wrench like prayer and muttered about valves until a rattle gave up and the house exhaled. In the evenings, I walked to the corner store for milk and counted my steps because the air made language brittle. I did not mention Seattle. When Harbor and Pike called with an offer wrapped in a relocation package so clean, it felt surgical. I signboxed my life and told Rosa I had found a better fit, the phrase people use for clothes and jobs when they want to leave everyone's dignity intact. Seattle changed my angles. The light off the water sharpened edges I'd been rounding for years. My new office had glass walls I left unadorned and a calendar full of meetings that started when they said they would. I rode the bus in the morning with a tumbler of coffee and a face that did not invite conversation. Rivers of people moved purposefully, even when they were lost. It was comforting to blend into intention. I flew home for Thanksgiving with a carry-on and a round trip booked for the next day. Rosa met me at the curb with that bright tiredness she reserved for holidays. "You look thin," she said, as if it were a weather report. Inside, Elena had organized the place settings to give herself the chair with the best light. The tablecloth was the same one she'd stained a year before. The shadow of the old spill lingered if you knew where to look. I carved the turkey because Mark's wrist had been acting up in the cold. He insisted on filling the water glasses with his other hand. Someone turned the radio low so the house could hear itself. The meal was fine until it wasn't. A nephew asked why my shoes didn't have red bottoms like Elena's. Rosa laughed a laugh she would later call harmless and passed me the bowl of sweet potatoes, as if that could erase a sentence. I ate what was on my plate and kept my voice small enough not to echo. After pie, I rinsed the dishes and placed them in the rack without stacking them. The muscle memory of being useful is real, and like all memories, it doesn't ask permission to return. A week later, my phone learned panic. 45 missed calls inserted themselves between meetings. A text preview opened its mouth like a siren. I was in an elevator when Rosa's voicemail unspooled in my ear, her voice stripped of sugar, landing hard on, "Please." I stepped back into the corridor and listened to the rest against the wall outside a conference room where someone was presenting a deck about municipal bonds. "Your sister is in trouble," Rosa said. No adjectives attached to the word trouble. The lack made the word larger. The messages braided Elena's name, followed by review, then complaint, then suspension pending. Vivian texted twice about a condo, and once about predatory lending, as if limits were wolves waiting outside the door. A cousin added collections the way people add salt without tasting first. The house, Rosa said in a second voicemail, needed a new roof before winter. The draft in the hallway was not metaphorical. The third message was quieter and therefore louder. Mara Mark said, and then paused as if addressing a room without lights. "Doctor says I need a procedure. Insurance will fight. I'm sorry we didn't tell you before." I sat on the floor in the corridor and watched my hands, which had stopped obeying me and were acting out a training I didn't remember designing. My phone buzzed again, an unknown number that turned out to be Elena's friend Nisha, speaking like a person who had been running for a long time. "She'll say she has it under control," Nisha said. "She doesn't. I'm not supposed to call you." I thanked her and told her I would handle my side of the street. Back at my desk, I opened a legal pad and drafted terms because feelings misfile themselves and documents do not. I wrote what I would and would not do. Not because I was writing a manifesto, but because lists calm the part of me that believes smallness is safety. I started with Mark. I would speak with the hospital, directly obtain pre-authorization, and ensure payment went to billing without a middle step where love is supposed to be. Not because I didn't trust, because I wanted the receipts to explain themselves without requiring memory. For Rosa and Elena, I wrote quietly, I would not participate in choreography that made me disappear. If I paid anything beyond the hospital, it would be expenses whose paper trail spelled my name. I would not send money into holes designed to remain holes. I jotted the house next. Roof first, but only with licensed bids in clear daylight. No cousin contractors paid in cash. No, we'll settle up later that blame time for theft. Then the part that felt like asking for oxygen in a room with windows, a public acknowledgement of what had been true. Not theater, not humiliation, a naming. I favored Elena, Rosa would say, I made you staff in your own house. And Elena would say her own truth without perfume, the lies, the leaning. Words in the air, not because air fixes anything, but because silence had been doing the opposite for years. I built a packet, like I build budgets. Hospital contact insurance number reference lines, an email I would send to the billing manager to confirm we were speaking the same language. A power of attorney form sat on the printer tray untouched. I didn't need it. I needed a direct line and a paper trail. I printed 2 copies of everything and slid them into a blue folder because blue was the easiest color to find in a messy room. The part of me that still mistakes usefulness for worth wanted to book the earliest flight and arrive like a siren. I made tea instead and stood at the kitchen window while steam ghosted the glass. Seattle rain thinned to a mist, the way panic thins when it has to do chores. I opened my work calendar and moved what I could. I called the hospital and asked for the surgical coordinator, then the billing office again, because the first person used a tone that meant both sweetheart and longhold. I wrote down names and times. I learned the dates and the codes. Numbers obediently built a bridge. Rosa called again, and this time I answered. She began with, "We're family," the phrase that in our home functioned as a broom. I let it pass. "When are you coming?" she asked. It was not a power play, it was a reflex. I told her I would land in 2 days. Should I tell people, she asked, meaning the relatives who clap on cue, and the neighbors who treat news like yeast. Invite whoever you want in the living room, I said, and then clarified. Because clarity prevented anyone from claiming. I'd whispered later, I'll need to explain how this works before I call the hospital back. She made a noise that in a different life might have been a laugh. You always had a way with numbers, she said, and I wondered which part of always she believed I had lived inside. I packed a carry-on the way I once packed a lunch. The blue folder took up half the space. I added a sweater, 2 changes of underwear, a book I didn't intend to open. At the last minute, I slid in a photograph I kept in the kitchen drawer, a small square of me on the bluff at Discovery Park, wind, pushing my hair sideways the color of the sky, trying to decide itself. I wasn't sentimental. I was reminding myself I existed when rooms tried to make me conditional. O'Hare at night looks like a grid dreaming of being a constellation. I watched the runways knit and unknit and touched the blue folder every time the plane changed pitch. On the ground, the air was older than Seattle's. It knew me. I picked up a rental without speaking more than a sentence and drove the Interstate East billboards arguing with one another about vices and salvation. In the cup holder, the hospital printout curled at the edges, as if it were trying to stand up and walk. The duplex's porch light flickered once when I turned onto our street, and then steadied as if deciding it would behave for me. Inside, the house smelled like onions and dishwasher steam. Rosa's voice came from the dining room talking to someone about chairs and timing. Mark was in the hallway, one hand on the molding, the other in his pocket. He looked different in a way that didn't ignite anger. "Kiddo," he said. I hugged him, careful of the place where the surgeon would go. He leaned weight into me for 1 second, and then remembered his posture. Rosa appeared with a stack of coasters, as if she needed a reason to be in the doorway. "You made it," she said, surprised by the thing she had asked for. Elena hovered in the arch to the kitchen in a blazer that read, "As apology from a distance, an argument up close." Her eyes were tired in a way I recognized from strangers in waiting rooms. She opened her mouth and then closed it on a breath that didn't finish. "I'll make tea," I said, "because kitchens are neutral when you fill them with work." I set the kettle on and put the blue folder on the table where we ate Sunday pancakes. No one touched it. The house listened, or maybe I did. Steam climbed. The porch light didn't flicker again. The kettle clicked off. I poured hot water over tea bags and mismatched mugs and set them on the table beside the blue folder. Elena stood with her hand on the chair back, as if bracing against weather. Rosa arranged spoons so carefully it read his apology. Mark sat his palm flat on the table, like he was checking for a pulse. "We'll talk in the front room," I said. "Then I'll call the hospital." Rosa nodded without asking what talk meant. She fetched a dish towel and draped it over the arm of the sofa as if the furniture needed comforting. Through the window, I could see a neighbor steering a trash bin down the sidewalk, wheels thudding a rhythm I borrowed to steady my breath. Relatives arrived the way relatives do, one by one, coats smelling like cold air and car heaters, faces trained to be supportive before knowing what they were supporting. Vivian came first, carrying a tin of cookies like it could sweeten the facts. 2 cousins followed, whispering into their collars. Someone set a bowl of clementines on the coffee table, because fruit communicates civility. I put the blue folders in the center and sat where the gravy boat used to live on holidays. "Here's the order," I said. "Truth first, then we settle the surgery, then house rules." I didn't raise my voice. The room quieted as if a hand had been laid on it. Rosa went for the soft opening. "We're family," she began, "and family can handle specifics," I said, flipping the folder open. Paper, even in a small stack, feels like a tool when you've been taught to carry things. I laid out the pre-authorization form I drafted, the notes from my calls, the contact sheet for billing. I kept the copy of the power of attorney face down. It wasn't needed, and I didn't intend to make it decorative. "Nothing passes through intermediaries," I said. "No reimbursements. No, we'll settle up later. I'll call billing today. We'll get a reference number and a date." "Mark." I turned to him. "You'll have what you need." Mark's fingers flexed once. "Thank you," he said to the paper, then to me. Elena shifted in the doorway. "This feels like leverage," she said, each word spaced as if she were laying down tiles she hoped would form a path. "It's logistics," I said. "Leverage was the last 28 years. Vivian touched my wrist. I moved my hand a half-inch so she touched air. "Maybe we don't need to turn the living room into a courtroom," she said lightly. "It already was," I said. "We just never called witnesses." Rosa's mouth pinched at the corners. She looked at the hallway, at the orderly ascent of Elena's framed achievements. "I should have," she began, then stopped because apologies are different from regret, and the tongue knows it. "We'll get to that," I said. "First, facts." I slid a printed timeline across the table. "Elena, there's a review, there's a complaint, there's a suspension pending, the condo is in arrears, collections started. All of that is true." Elena's jaw tightened where her makeup didn't dare go. "The process is unfair," she said. "The allegations are twisted." "That's not the question," I said. "Is it true?" She looked at the tin of cookies as if it contained an answer. And then when the silence didn't offer rescue, she nodded once. "Yes." Rosa exhaled the way she exhales when a pot boils over. Relieved to be done with anticipation, grieved to be dealing with the burn. She turned toward me. "We're asking for help," she said. And for the first time since I'd walked in, the sentence had no garnish. "I'll help with the surgery," I said. "Direct to the hospital." I let the words sit. "For anything else, there are conditions." Elena laughed without angle. "So this is ransom? Dad's procedure in exchange for your list?" "No," I said. "Dad's procedure because he needs it. The list because I do." I tapped the folder. "This house runs on choreography. I won't dance unless we change the music." Vivian opened the tin and pushed it toward me, a reflex that looked like love but registered as distraction. I closed the lid gently. "Rosa," I said, and used her name because Mom had always carried a script. "Say the thing we both know." She stared at the framed Yale letter, as if it had just become bilingual. The room held its breath for her. "I favored Elena," she said oddly. Voice steady. "I made you staff in your own home." The words were not elegant. They were accurate. My body didn't do anything dramatic. No tear, no gasp. It just unclenched a piece I had been guarding in case accuracy never arrived. I turned to Elena. Your turn. I'm not doing a performance, she said. It isn't one, I said. It's a record. She stared at me long enough to make me feel the shape of my own face, then looked down at her hands. I spent money I didn't have, she said. I borrowed against next month and called it hard work. I used your words when mine didn't land. I liked you best when you were helpful. She swallowed. I'm not asking you to fix everything. I'm not offering to, I said. Rosa pressed fingertips to her temples and smoothed imaginary lines. Can we please take care of your father now, she asked, and it was the kind of plea that doesn't weaponize sympathy, just takes it by the elbow. Yes, I said. I took out my phone, dialed the hospital, and put it on speaker. The room shifted to make space for bureaucracy. When the coordinator answered, I gave Mark's full name, date of birth, and the procedure code written on my notes. I confirmed pre-authorization, asked for the billing department, then gave billing the policy number, our household address, my contact information, and the phrase that matters when money moves. Direct payment from me to you. No third-party disbursement. The woman on the line sounded surprised in the way people sound surprised by clarity. She read me the reference number. I repeated it and wrote it down. We scheduled a date. I asked for the confirmation email and dictated my address. When I hung up, the room did not applaud. It exhaled. Mark's shoulders lowered a notch. He rubbed his wedding ring with his thumb like he was polishing an idea. Okay, he said. It was more than okay and less than enough, which is what relief often is. I slid a printout across to Rosa. Here's the roof, I said. 3 licensed bids by Friday. No cousins, ours. No cash. I'll review them and pay the contractor directly if the numbers make sense. She nodded. She did not argue that cousins are family, and family discounts are generous. The room had learned the price of generosity done wrong. Now the house, I said, and looked toward the hallway. The frames waited neat, sure of their placement. Those come down. I didn't look at Elena when I said it. I looked at the wall like it was a person who could listen. We replace them with a mix. Everyone who lives here. Everyone who has. Or we leave the space blank until the story catches up. That's petty, Elena said, and the word sounded less like judgment than it once would have. It's accurate, I said. I pulled the small photograph from my bag, the one of me on the bluff at Discovery Park, and set it on the coffee table. Wind pushed my hair sideways in the picture. The sky was undecided. This goes up, I said, or nothing does. Rosa didn't hesitate. She stood, walked to the hallway, and lifted the frame around the Yale letter with 2 hands like it brittle. Glass whispered against the wall. She set the frame on the console table, like a guest who had stayed long enough. Elena watched but didn't move. Vivian took down a portrait from a reception and leaned it against the baseboard not unkindly. A cousin carried a small ladder from the utility closet and clicked open the legs. The hallway looked suddenly larger, as if the house had taken a deeper breath. We returned to the living room. I opened the next sheet. No errands. No orders masquerading as requests. No comparisons at meals. If it happens anyway, I leave. No speeches on the porch, no chases down the walkway. I set the page beside the tea rings. I'm not punishing anyone, I said. This is a manual. Vivian raised a hand like a student. What about Christmas, she asked, and her voice betrayed her calm, written against a nervous system that liked choreography too. We'll see if the manual holds, I said. If it doesn't, we revise. I wasn't promising presents. I was promising coherence. Elena sat at last. She put her elbows on her knees and knit her fingers together with the intensity of someone making knots they intend to keep. I can't fix the review overnight, she said, but I can speak to the debt. There's a card with a rate that should be illegal. There's a loan from a person I shouldn't have called. Write it down, I said. She did names and balances like a confession that turned out to be math. I didn't reach for the paper. I let it sit with her. If I touch anything on that list I added, it becomes transparent. No shell games. No later surprises that begin with "I meant to tell you." She nodded. It wasn't humility. It was surrender to physics. We ate 1 clementine each like communion. The sugar woke the room. Mark stood and tried to rise too fast. His chair answered with a squeak. I took his arm and pretended I hadn't. Rosa looked at the frames leaning against the wall. Her mouth softened. Where should your picture go? She asked. Over the couch, I said. so whoever sits there can look up and see something true. Rosa put her sleeve over her palm and wiped a faint line on the wall as if she could erase time with cotton. She took the small photograph to the hallway and held it up where the Yale letter had been. The nails lined up as if the wall had expected a swap someday. Vivian handed her the hammer, and there, with no speech, we made a new arrangement. The doorbell rang once an uncle late enough to miss the first act, but determined to be seen in the second. Rosa didn't move to answer. I didn't either. The bell gave up. The house held. I excused myself to the kitchen and called billing again because bureaucracy respects redundancy. The email had arrived. I read it aloud to my voicemail and saved it, then forwarded it to an account I kept for documents that mattered. When I returned, Elena and Vivian were propping the last frame against the baseboard. Vacant space on the wall looked like honesty. Rosa touched my forearm, light asking, "Can I say something to you alone?" she asked. "Here is fine," I said, not unkindly. She nodded. "I saw you try to make yourself smaller so we wouldn't break," she said. "I let that happen because it helped me believe I hadn't failed anyone." She smiled without showing teeth. "That's done." I didn't tell her it had been done for me the day I moved into the studio over the nail salon and learned the hiss of a radiator was not a question. I said, "All right," and meant it. A cousin cleared his throat into his fist. To Mara, he said not loud. Glasses lifted as if the room had practiced. The toast was awkward and exact. We carried the blue folder back to the kitchen table. I wrote the reference number one more time at the top of a page, big, deliberate. The kettle, convinced it was included, hummed to itself for no reason, and died. Mark sat with his hands around a mug, as if heat could teach joints. Elena stared at the photo over the couch, and for once, I couldn't read her face. When I dialed the surgical scheduler to confirm, the line picked up quickly. Dates clicked into place like teeth aligning. I wrote each detail until my handwriting steadied. Rosa stood beside me with the expression she wore when I was little, and sick a concern that didn't try to prove anything. I ended the call, closed the folder, and slid it to the center of the table. The stack felt lighter, though nothing had been removed. I looked around the room that had taught me how not to echo. It wasn't quiet. Quiet is something else. It was simply normal, which for us was new. "Eat," Rosa said, and set a plate of toast between us, because women in my family understand that starch is a kind of conclusion. I ate not to please anyone, not to justify space just because I was hungry. Steam from our cups curled and thinned and disappeared. The porch light outside held steady. The hospital's atrium smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and coffee. I checked Mark in at the surgical desk, handed over the blue folder, and watched the clerk's face change when the reference number matched her screen. Rosa carried a paper cup in both hands as if it might leap. Elena arrived late, hair pulled into a knot that made her look younger and more tired. We took 3 chairs along the window and pretended to read pamphlets about recovery while the morning turned itself into noon. A nurse with a badge that said Alma called Mark's name. He stood, adjusted his jacket out of habit, and let me take it when he realized he wouldn't need it where he was going. "You'll be in good hands," Alma said, and it didn't sound like an empty phrase. When they wheeled him through the double doors, Rosa pressed 2 fingers to the seam where the doors kissed, then dropped her hand when she noticed herself. Billing called my number. I walked to the counter, gave them the same reference, watched the total settle, and signed where the lines asked me to. The clerk slid a printed receipt across warm from the machine. I tucked it into a clear sleeve and returned to the chairs. Elena stared at my hands. "They always listen to you," she said, not envious, not admiring, just noticing a physics she hadn't trained for. "They listen to the paperwork," I said. "Waiting rooms create a truce or a war, depending on the hour." Hours held. Vivian arrived with a crossword book and decided to do it silently. Rosa dozed and woke and didn't apologize. I refilled cups, wrote down questions I would ask when someone arrived with answers, and didn't try to narrate anything we couldn't know. The surgeon appeared in a blue cap and a voice that had delivered this kind of news often enough to wear the right softness. "It went well," he said. "Textbook. He'll be in recovery for a while. Then one of you can see him." A breath I hadn't named left my body. Rosa put her face in her hands, then smoothed her hair like she was restoring a surface. Elena leaned back against the vinyl and looked at the ceiling tiles as if they were constellations that finally meant something. I went first because the nurse asked who had handled the paperwork and because Rosa insisted. Recovery rooms smell like warm plastic and caution. Mark's skin looked a shade too pale, but his mouth tugged at one corner when I said his name. We did the thing I told him, and his eyes found mine as if my voice had a map. He tried to speak and failed, and squeezed my fingers instead. I placed the receipt sleeve on the tray table, even though he couldn't read it yet. "You're covered," I said. "Rest." Back at the duplex that evening, we ate soup at the kitchen table in the good bowls. No one argued with Salt. The hallway looked newly born, frames leaning blank spaces on the wall, behaving like invitations rather than wounds. Elena pulled her blazer tighter and set her phone face down. "I called the card company," she said to the table. "I asked for terms in writing. She said it as an update, not a plea." Rosa nodded, which in our home used to be a period, and now is only a comma. The roofing bids came in like weather reports, too reasonable, one, beautiful, and unserious. I circled numbers with a pencil and chose the middle licensed bonded not cheap. I called the contractor and arranged the deposit straight from my account to theirs. No one objected. The sound of a nail gun 2 days later made the house jump and settle, as if the roof itself had grown lungs. When Mark came home, he moved like someone asked to learn his own body again. We kept the television low. Rosa cooked boiled potatoes that forgave timing. Elena brought over a stack of envelopes and opened them at the dining table one by one, reading balances in a voice that stayed even. She didn't ask me to fix them. She didn't hide them either. Some we could handle, some we could only name. Naming did something to the air. Rosa stood in the hall with a cloth and wiped the strip of wall where the Yale letter had hung. She didn't look back to check if I was watching. "Where do you want yours?" she called from the ladder, and I told her again over the couch. She hung the small photograph. It looked almost too modest for the space, which turned out to be exactly right. Mark sat beneath it with a blanket over his knees and closed his eyes as if the picture made shade. The rules held in small ways first. At dinner, Rosa caught herself halfway through a sentence that compared me to Elena and redirected to the weather. Elena asked if we needed anything from the store, then went and returned with everything on the list without improvising a single addition. I took a call from the hospital in the driveway so the house didn't have to perform interest in codes and deductibles. The porch light stayed steady. The doorbell worked. The deadbolt turned cleanly. On my last afternoon before flying back, I walked to the pharmacy to get Mark's prescription and bought Rosa a set of picture hooks that don't scar as deep. At the register, the cashier asked if I wanted a bag, and I said no, and I carried everything in my arms because sometimes carrying is the point. When I came back, Vivian was trimming a bunch of grocery store tulips to fit a short glass. "They'll last a week," she said. "Sometimes that's plenty." We ate early washed dishes without commentary and sat in the front room in a circle that didn't feel like an arrangement. Elena looked at the photograph and then at me. "You should send me a copy," she said. "I will," I said, and the future tense didn't feel like a dare. I put the blue folder in the kitchen drawer next to the takeout menus. Rosa opened and closed the drawer once just to see it there, then let it be. Mark fell asleep with his chin tucked, the blanket rising and falling as if measuring time. Vivian packed the tulips into the fridge for the night with a technique she swore by, and I didn't argue. In the morning, I hugged my father carefully, my mother briefly, my sister without spectacle. Elena walked me to the porch and didn't speak until we reached the step. "I'm sorry," she said. The words came out like coins counted carefully. "I don't expect—" She stopped, then tried again. "I'll keep the rules." "Keep them for yourself," I said. It wasn't instruction. It was a sentence I knew how to say without shaking. At the airport, I opened my email and found the hospital confirmation, the contractor's schedule, and a message from Lucas that contained only a meeting time and the subject line. "Welcome back." I put my phone face down and watched planes taxi and turn. The sky over the Midwest is a different blue than the sky over the Sound. Both are serviceable. Seattle returned me to its water and grid. In my apartment, I placed a duplicate of the photograph in a frame and set it on the bookshelf where sun reaches in the afternoon. I called Mark's cell and let it ring twice before hanging up so he'd see Mara and not have to answer if he didn't want to. Rosa texted a picture of toast under my picture and a caption that said only good morning. Elena sent a scan of a letter on firm letterhead that contained numbers instead of adjectives. I saved it in a folder named Clear. I went for a walk and returned to make tea. Steam drew its quick ghosts on the window and vanished. The apartment didn't need me to be smaller. The cupboards closed cleanly, keys hung where they belonged. Outside, a bus sighed at the curb and left, and the quiet that followed didn't ask for anything. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time, as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.